Hello and welcome back to the Peter MacKay Motorsport Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to our little show. Today we're going to talk about the recent IMSA Weathertech Sports Car Championship round at the Petit Le Mans at Road Atlanta, a 10-hour epic enduro that finishes off the IMSA Weathertech Sports Car Championship season in the United States of America. So, for those of you who are maybe not familiar with what IMSA is, well, IMSA is one of my favourite series. It's effectively the American National Sports Car Championship, so they're equivalent to our World Endurance Championship, if you like, but operates on a very, very high level indeed, with some of the best sports car drivers in the world in factory supported teams. It is a wonderful, wonderful spectacle. In the United States, you've got some of the finest racetracks in the world as well. You've got classics like Laguna Seca, Road Atlanta, where the Petit Le Mans is held, Sebring, Daytona, or even actually step over into Canada, go to Mosport, Canadian, what's now called Canadian Tire Motorsport Park, Lime Rock, Watkins Glen. Oh, I love Watkins Glen. So there's so many brilliant tracks that they go to, and you have 4 classes of racing. You have something called DPI, which is the kind of top class, which is a prototype chassis. So it kind of looks more like a spaceship than a car. Very similar to what you would see competing at the top level at Le Mans. So it's a prototype chassis with a kind of silhouette, sort of the front bodywork's designed to look slightly like the manufacturer entering. So in the DPI class, you have some Mazdas, you have some Acuras, as they're called in the United States, not Hondas, Acuras. You have the Cadillacs, and you have a Nissan as well. And the cool thing about DPI is that although the cars look relatively similar in terms of their shape, actually the engines that they all use are completely different. So the Mazda runs with a 4-cylinder 2-litre turbocharged engine, very, very high revving, really, really a screaming engine. Then you have, on the polar opposite end of the scale, you have the Cadillac. The Cadillac is a big old naturally aspirated V8, very, very traditional American motorsport engine. And then in the middle, you've got the Acura, which is a V6 twin turbo setup as well. So any manufacturer can come to the party. They've got relatively the dimensions and the setup of their bodywork and their chassis are relatively closely controlled to control cost, but the engine is relatively free in terms of at least the style, so they don't all have to use a 1.6 litre turbo, for example. They can use all different power plants. And IMSA across all classes apply something called balance of performance, which is used to basically level the field to ensure that lots of different styles of car can come to the party and compete. So maybe if one car is a little bit too fast, they might add a little bit of weight or close the restrictor size down a little bit to take away a little bit of horsepower. So there's lots of different things they can do looking at the data to try and control one manufacturer over another to try and ensure close racing, and close racing is exactly what you get in DPI. Then you have the LMP2 class, which is similar shape of car to DPI, and unfortunately this year has only had two cars entering, so it's really been a bit of a nothing class this year, which has been a shame. So that's all we will say about LMP2 in IMSA. The other 2 classes in the series are the GTLM class and the GTD class. So the GTLM is a GT racing car, so a car like you could buy certainly the silhouette of the car is like a car you could buy from the showroom. So you have either a Ferrari 488 or a Ford GT or a BMW M8 or a Corvette or a Porsche 911. But the difference with these cars compared to the GTD cars is that these are full factory outfits that are running these cars with all full factory drivers. So the big difference is that all of the drivers there's no restrictions on the drivers that you can have. So most of the drivers that you will see in the GTLM class will be classified by the governing body, the FIA, as what are called platinum drivers. So it goes platinum all the way down to bronze, depending on a driver's skill, and platinum driver, of course, being the finest, and that's more or less what GTLM is filled with. Again, same as the DPI class, balance of performance is in effect. So, a £450,000 road car like the Ford GT, it can be entered and converted into a race car and can race against the kind of equivalent Porsche 911 as well. In GTD, or GT Daytona to give it its full name, the GTD cars, they run to the global GT3 regulations, which again is a GT racing car based off a production model. So in there you get, you'll have Mercedes AMG GTs, you'll have BMW M6s, Acura NSXs, Porsche 911s as well, Ferrari 488s, and so on. The difference in GTD is that you must have one bronze driver within your driver lineup. And normally, in the way that the business model works in GTD, is that there is usually the bronze driver will be what's referred to as a gentleman driver, who will normally be picking up the tab for that particular team, or will be at least contributing a significant financial amount to the finances of running of the team. So you'll have someone like, you'll have somebody like Mike Shank Racing, who will run an Acura NSX, and one of the drivers in the car will be paying to be, if not both, will be paying to be there, either out of their own pocket or perhaps through a sponsor. So one of the front running teams in GT Daytona is the number 33 Mercedes AMG, where you have professional drivers Felipe Fraga and Jerome Blakemolen, who will be paid to be there. And then you have Ben Keating, who is a very successful car dealer in the United States, and he will be paying to be there as a hobby. And that's the kind of cool thing about sports car racing is that if you have the money, you can go, and you have the money and you've got your racing license, you can go in and you can go and race in IMSA, and eventually you can go and race at Le Mans if you really want to. So that's the cool thing I like about sports cars is that as a fan, if you have the means, you can go and get completely involved and join in on all the action and get to know some professional race car drivers, and actually give some of them a helping hand in their career as well, which I can imagine is very satisfying indeed. So that's the breakdown of the tracks that IMSA goes to, the types of vehicles that you see, and all of these vehicles are all racing on track at the same time. So the speed of the prototype cars are much, much quicker. Even on a short lap like Road Atlanta that we just saw at the Petit Le Mans, it is, when you're talking 15-20 seconds a lap difference. So the closing speeds, and as we saw a number of times, the faster cars trying to cut through traffic can sometimes cause a lot of problems, and that's one of the biggest challenges of sports car racing, and what makes multi-class sports car racing so exciting. So what is the Petit Le Mans? Well, the Petit Le Mans first came about in the late 1990s when a guy called Don Panos, who is one of the real godfathers of sports car racing, and one of the real architects of the success of sports car racing in North America. And he came up with this idea that they would run a kind of shortened version of what they do at the Le Mans 24 Hours in France. They would do effectively an American version of it. So they elected Michelin Raceway Road Atlanta, which is a wonderful circuit in Georgia, a really nice undulating circuit, quite a short lap, but very, very cool indeed. Used to be owned by a guy called Randy Lanier, who was one of the best or most naughty drug traffickers in the United States in the 1980s. He was actually he raced quite successfully in the IMSA Championship himself, and he was making so much money smuggling marijuana that he actually ended up buying Road Atlanta. But he doesn't own it anymore, does Randy? But the Road Atlanta is a wonderful, wonderful circuit, and very, very tricky actually for the faster vehicles and the faster prototype prototype cars to get through the field and deal with traffic. So the Petit Le Mans, it goes for 10 hours rather than the full fat Le Mans in France. It goes for 24 hours. But my goodness me, does it open up some wonderful racing. And you think after 10 hours, the field would be spread out? Nope. This year, the race went down to the very last moment in nearly every class in the race. It was absolutely extraordinary. So, what did we see? Well, we'll start with the DPI class, which is basically for the outright victory. We saw a return to the top step of the podium from the number 31 Whelen Engineering Cadillac. Now, the Cadillacs this year they started off brilliantly with the Wayne Taylor racing car, the number 10 Wayne Taylor racing car, which is a Cadillac, won the opening race of the year at the very famous Daytona at 24 hours. Now the car's two regular drivers, Jordan Taylor and Renger van de Zande, they were in the car, but they in order to do a 24-hour race, you need more than two people. So they have to go out and find two other drivers to share the driving with. Well, you could say they threw the kitchen sink at it, because they asked Kamui Kobayashi, Formula 1 driver, Toyota LMP1 driver, and a guy called Fernando Alonso. You may have heard of him. Double Le Mans winner, double Formula 1 world champion. And they went out and they won the Daytona 24 hours. They had another good run at Sebring, at the 12 hours of Sebring, getting on the podium there. But unfortunately, the number 10 Cadillac has not been on the podium since. Now, going back to the 31 Cadillac, the Whelen Engineering car, they were the guys that they absolutely dominated at Sebring and won at Sebring. But it has been pretty slim pickings for the Cadillac guys since then. There was the number 5 Action Express Mustang sampling Cadillac won at Long Beach early in the season, but since then it has been the Acuras in particular, and to a certain extent the Mazdas, that have been doing all of the winning. Now, we mentioned the word balance of performance earlier on. It's forever a debate that goes on in sports car racing, that what is the balance of performance and how does it affect the results? Well, if you're a Cadillac team owner, you're probably saying that you haven't had a fair balance of performance setting since the start of the season. But the Acuras, they're probably quite happy and they've probably stayed quite quiet about it. So having to set that what's called balance of performance accurately is a constant challenge for the series organisers, and some series are better at it than others. And basically they've got to take into account they've got to take into account how fast the car is in a straight line, how good is it through the corners, how good is it over a single lap, how much does it use its brakes, its tyres, and so on. And that is a very, very difficult thing to keep everybody happy. And it's definitely swung in the favour of, it's almost like a little bit of a pendulum. It kind of swings back and forth, but it's trying to tighten up how much that pendulum swings. If it can only swing a little bit and there's only a small advantage from time to time, then that's okay, I think, because to be honest, any track you go to, balance of performance or not, there will always be cars that have a slight advantage. And you've got to remember that you've got to compare the skill of the guys driving the cars as well. That's very, very important. And I think when discussing balance of performance, that is almost lost, and the skill of the driver is almost taken out of it, and their performances are usually caveated on how good their balance of performance is in their car. And I find that's really, really harsh on the drivers, is that they win a race, they go, oh, well, their car had a better balance of performance, they should have had more weight on or whatever. And then if they have a bad race, well, they don't get the benefit for dragging a result out of a car that's just not quick enough. So it is a really, really sticky issue, the balance of performance. But if you want to have a Cadillac come in with their big American V8, Mazda with their little screaming little 2-litre 4-cylinder turbo, and Acura with their V6 twin turbo, if you're going to have all three of these guys competing, balance of performance is absolutely necessary. And when we go into the GT classes, it's even more important again. So the Cadillacs, they have had a tougher year, but they had a brilliant race at Petit Le Mans with the number 31 of Whelen Engineering car of Philippe Nazar, Eric Curran and Pipo Derani, followed by the number 10 of Jordan Taylor, Renger van der Zande, and Vaxivierge. So actually, it would have been a Cadillac 123, but the number 5 car, the Mustang sampling car, which of Juan Barbosa, Philippe Albuquerque, and Mike Conway, was the car to beat throughout the middle and the later part of the race, and was leading the race. Philippe Albuquerque at the wheel, holding station, looking like they were going to come to the finish line in first place. But with about 20 minutes to go, coming down Road Atlanta's very, very fast downhill, back straight into, I think must be a second gear corner in the DPI car. So they're coming probably from 180 miles an hour down to about 60 miles an hour. And at that point, there was a huge puff of smoke came from the front left tyre of that Mustang sampling Cadillac. And you thought, well, goodness me, that's a big lockup. And Philippe Albuquerque ran off into the gravel trap, and the number 10 and the number 31 Cadillacs got past him. And immediately, Philippe Albuquerque brought the number 5 Cadillac into the pits, and the camera was shown on, and basically his brake disc had more or less disintegrated under braking. Quite a scary moment, and Philippe Albuquerque did very well to keep the car out of the barriers, but unfortunately, that was the race done, and a breakdown, a mechanical failure like that from at the closing stages of a 10-hour race is just devastating for the team. Mike Conway in particular, bearing in mind he spends most of his season racing the hybrid, the dominant hybrid TS050 in the World Endurance Championship. So to jump out into a DPI Cadillac with a big naturally aspirated V8 is a very different proposition. But he took a major part of the middle part of the race in his share of the driving, and he showed his class of why he is one of the very best sports car drivers in the world right now, especially in prototypes. And it was such a shame, because apparently that number 5 car, run by Action Express Racing, who also run the 31 car, it looks like that number 5 car's got a bit of a funding gap, a little bit of a sponsorship gap, and won't be taken to the grid next year unless something is put together quite quickly, which is a great pity. And it would have been, who knows, with a Petit Le Mans win, how that could have maybe sparked some new sponsorship. But these are the sort of near misses in motorsport that can be so heartbreaking, and on the other hand can be so special when you're on the correct side of that sort of event. So the number 31 car that showed such incredible speed at the beginning of the race, Felipe Nasr, the ex-Formula 1 driver, there you go. There's a good reason why IMSA is a top series. You've got ex-Formula 1 drivers there. The number 31 car, Felipe Nasr at the wheel in the opening stint was just dominant. On balance, perhaps they deserved the win, but the number 5 car was seriously unlucky. Speaking of the number 10 Cadillac, we'll talk about other manufacturers soon, don't worry, but we'll close off the Cadillacs first. The number 10 car, Vaxivierge, who's the third driver joining Jordan Taylor and Renger van der Zande, unfortunately in his opening stint, hadn't been in the car since Sebring, and he had a little bit of a disaster, speeding in the pit lane, copped a drive-through penalty for that, and the fact that they finished in second place and just off the win, only a few seconds off the win, they will be, and they came from 8th position on the grid, and brilliant drives particularly from Jordan Taylor and teammate Renger van der Zande. What could have been for them to bookend the year with a win at the start of the year at Daytona and then another one at Petit Le Mans would have been wonderful. Particularly with Jordan Taylor about to leave his family team and go to race the new Corvette C8R as well. So we've seen used to be both Taylor boys, Ricky Taylor and Jordan Taylor, that raced for their dad's team, Wayne Taylor Racing, but both have since flown the nest. So that was a bit of a pity, and I think it highlighted the difference between the teams that had when they bring in a third driver, they do it properly. And for example, the championship winning car, the number 6 Acura of Dane Cameron and Juan Pablo Montoya, they brought in Simon Pagenaud, who's IndyCar champion and Indy 500 winner. You can't really get much higher pedigree than that as your third driver. The number 5 Mustang sampling car had Mike Conway, a Le Mans front runner. WEC, multiple WEC race winner. So it's that third driver is so important. The little Mazda, the number 77 Mazda, with Ollie Jarvis and Timo Bernhard, they were really unlucky. They were looking in the hunt possibly to compete for that race win, and unfortunately dropped off the pace near the end with a mechanical issue, which was such a pity, dropping out of the podium positions, which was such a shame. It was amazing how the race kind of just worked its way along, different cars and DPI running on different strategies, and it was almost hard to follow who was really winning the race as such with the pit stops and all these kinds of things. But the last half an hour or so, my goodness me, it was just crash bang wallop, and then it came out not in the right way for Mazda, which was a real pity. But I'm sure they will be back for more next year. So we'll move on to the next class now. We'll talk about GTLM, which is one of my favourite classes in the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship, because in this particular class you have all the manufacturers, the big GT manufacturers, coming in with absolute blockbuster driver lineups, and the closeness of the racing is incredible. And the racing this year in particular has been absolutely fantastic. Well, my favourite race of the year this year was actually the shortest race. It was the race at Long Beach. It was only 1 hour and 40 minutes long, and you can get it on IMSA's brilliant YouTube channel. So go back and watch the IMSA Long Beach race. If you haven't seen it, I will not spoil the result. Go and watch it because it is fantastic, and in particular the GTLM battle in that particular race. So in GTLM, as I said, you've got cars that you'll see on the street. You've got Ferrari 488s, Corvettes, Porsche 911s, that kind of thing. Ford GT, I don't think you see many of them on the street, but they're racing in this particular class as well. GTLM was interesting at Petit Le Mans. We had an appearance from the number 62 Risi Competizione Ferrari, which has had a relatively quiet year. It raced at Daytona and it raced at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, but that's about it for Risi Competizione. So Risi Competizione is it's not a factory team as such. It's kind of like a semi-factory team. So if you look at like the Chip Ganassi Fords, that's a factory effort. And the RHL BMW is a factory effort. The Corvette's very much a factory effort, and so are the Porsche cars as well. So when a car manufacturer or a motorsport factory are behind a project, that has a whole new level of funding. But the Ferrari Risi Competizione have an incredible heritage and history in motor racing, always with Ferraris, backed by Ferrari dealers, but the driver lineup that they had was pure factory. They had James Collado, Alessandro Puerguidi, and Daniel Serra, the winners of the GTE class, which is the equivalent of the GTLM, winners of the GTE class at Le Mans this year, and they completed the unique achievement of winning Petit Le Mans and Grand Le Mans, for lack of a better word, in the same year. So that was pretty cool. So seeing the Ferrari coming back in after only completing one other IMSA race this year and coming in and winning straight away was fantastic. However, that does raise the question of balance of performance. If you're not racing regularly, trying to set that balance of performance is quite difficult. And really, the guys who set that balance of performance, they've only really got the opening practices to make a kind of call on that, and if they need to make an adjustment to BOP. So that does open up the prospect of sandbagging, where, say, for example, Ferrari come in and they run deliberately slowly, maybe a second off the pace or so during practice, and it looks like, oh, well, we need to give Ferrari a little bit less weight or open up the restrictor a little bit, and then in the race, hey presto, they're 9/10 of a second faster than anyone else, and you think, how did that happen? We've seen that before. But it didn't starve us of a good battle in GTLM. We had a great Ford versus Ferrari classic battle between the number 67 Ford GT of Ryan Briscoe, Richard Westbrook, and IndyCar maestro Scott Dixon, Ganassi's man in IndyCar. But it was the Ferrari that came out on top. Speaking of the Fords, as I say, the number 67 in its wonderful Gulf livery colour scheme, unfortunately, that is the last that we will see of the factory Ford GTs. They came in 2016 with a 4-car effort at Le Mans to win that race, which they successfully did so. So they basically, the whole idea with the Ford GT coming into world sports car racing in 2016 was to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Ford's first win at the Le Mans 24 Hours in 1966, when they came in to try to defeat Ferrari after, it's quite a cool story actually, because Ford Motor Company basically were right on the cusp of buying the Ferrari company from its owner Enzo Ferrari, and just as the deal was about to be signed and Enzo Ferrari was about to put his very famous purple inked pen to paper and sign over the company to Henry Ford and his company, he noticed a clause in the contract which said that he would relinquish control of the company's racing department, and that Ford would take control of Ferrari's racing department. And Enzo was a very principled man, and racing was the only reason why Ferrari existed. He basically sold the road cars to pay for the race team, and ripped up the contract there and then, and sent the Ford executives back on their way. And Henry Ford was absolutely livid at this snub from Enzo Ferrari, and he says, right, we're gonna give them a taste of their own medicine here. And at that point, Ferrari were the dominant force at Le Mans, winning many races at that time. And Henry Ford said, right, we're gonna beat them. And then they came in and won 4 years on the trot at Le Mans from 66 to 69. So back in 2016, Ford introduced not only the Ford GT racing car, but the Ford GT road car. But basically the Ford GT road car was only built, a minimum number of examples was built to effectively qualify to compete at Le Mans. And each of these cars was sold, I think they were £450,000, and even then there was an invitation list of people who were given the opportunity to part with £450,000 to buy one of these amazing Ford GT cars. So there was much kind of argument at the time from other manufacturers who were competing cars which retailed for, you know, a quarter of that price and were built in much larger numbers. But again, balance of performance is something that can be used to level that out. However, what we saw in that time at 2016 at Le Mans was that the Ford GT looked slow in testing, looked slow in qualifying, and then all of a sudden, bang, it came out with loads of pace in the race. So read into that what you will. But it will be such a shame to see those Ford GTs leaving not only IMSA, but they've already left, of course, the World Endurance Championship. We saw in private hands Ben Keating, who I mentioned earlier in the podcast, Ben Keating, who purchased the first privately owned Ford GT racing car, took it to Le Mans and won on the road in the GTE AM class this year, but sadly was disqualified due to a fueling infringement where basically the tank of the car was about a litre too big and the refueling was happening about half a second too quickly, but that was enough to be excluded from the results. And I think from what I understand that has that'll certainly have put Ben off competing that car again, and I don't think it's a terribly easy car to operate, and certainly not a cheap car to operate. And we've seen Ben move to the Project One Porsche team in the WEC, which I presume will mean that he will compete at Le Mans in that Porsche with his teammates, and his Ford GT will remain a bit of a museum piece, sadly. So I really hope that those Ford GT cars end up in other racing teams' hands, end up in some private hands, and they actually get back onto the track, because they are the most amazing looking vehicles and really add so much to the spectacle of sports car racing, and it would be such a shame to see them retired completely to collections and museums and things like that. So let's hope not. But I think it's important to say thank you to Ford and to Chip Ganassi and to all the folks that put that program together. If we've only had 4 years, we thank you very much, because they were awesome. However, Ford's driver program, the guys who race for Ford, there's some really, really top end drivers who are now looking for drives, and in IMSA at the moment you have a lot more drivers of a very high standard looking for drives and less cars for them to fit into. And the series is going to come into a little bit of difficulty in the next couple of years of trying to satisfy that demand for drivers and to have enough cars on the grid. So we'll need to wait and see what happens there. But I sincerely hope that that these drivers all find seats to race in for next season. Last mention with GTLM is the Porsche team. So Porsche, they had already wrapped up the manufacturer's title, and it was just down to decide a free race to decide who would be drivers' championship. So all year we've seen brilliant battles between the 912 car of Earl Bamber and Lawrence Vantor, and the 911 car of Nick Tandy and Patrick Pilet. And it needed a little bit of a miracle for Tandy and Pilet to claim the driver's title. They had to win, and basically Earl Bamber and Vantour to come last in the class, which was highly unlikely to happen. Despite Earl Bamber having a little bit of an altercation with the number 31 Cadillac with only 5 or 10 minutes to go in the race, but they both made it through safely. But sadly, after having probably the superior pace throughout the season, the Porsche 912 and the Porsche 911 cars finished in 5th and 6th place respectively, which is not where they've been used to finishing, and they've had a slightly tough end to the season. But I suspect, again, caveat, there's a little bit of a balance of performance pendulum swinging around there, and it maybe not in their favour necessarily, but they've had a very, very successful year nonetheless. Drivers' champions and team champions, and to be honest, I would say well deserved indeed. Earl Bamber and Lawrence Vantour have been absolute class all year, and likewise so have Nick Tandy and Patrick Pilet. Sadly, Petit Le Mans was the farewell for the naturally aspirated 911 RSR, which I think is one of the finest sounding racing cars ever produced. Just the sheer scream and the high revving nature of that car, revving all the way around to, well, I think nearly 10,000 RPM. It was so loud. 4 litres, flat 6, normally aspirated. Sadly, moving to a turbo motor next year, which they've already started racing with in the World Endurance Championship, which, having experienced and listened to it trackside, is nowhere near as spectacular as the old 911 RSR. But we will still see the old style 911 RSR for the rest of the season in the World Endurance Championship until Le Mans basically next year. So we can enjoy them in amateur hands until then. But Petit Le Mans basically that closed off their factory tenure, if you like, the 911 RSR. If you've not heard one of these Porsche 911 RSRs before, just look it up on YouTube. They are absolutely incredible machines. Okay, so lastly, we'll talk about GTD, which is one of my favourite classes in IMSA, because of the Pro-Am element of it. So what I find so cool about it is that you can have, in a team of 2 or a team of 3, you've got one driver who is effectively what they call a gentleman driver, who is either paying a lot to be there or is funding the whole programme altogether. And it's just extraordinary that kind of dynamic, how you've got guys who will pay so much money to go in there and race alongside professionals and race against professionals. I mean, the fact that you're taking to the grid and you can be on track racing wheel to wheel with someone who has been karting since they're 6 years old, and you're a 40-year-old person, and you're trying your best to keep in front of them, and for a few laps you are. And that is, and the kind of timing of when you put your amateur driver in is so important. That strategy, they have to do a minimum drive time. They have a certain amount of time that they have to be at the wheel of the car. I think it's about 45 minutes. And then the professionals will take the rest. I just love that aspect. What other sport can you say where that's possible? It's almost like for any golfers listening, the Dunhill Links Championship, which is a golf championship in Scotland, played over three courses: St Andrews, Kings, Barnes and Carnoustie, and the professionals will play with an amateur, and their combined score is put together. So that's about as close as you can get, but that's only one event a year, whereas basically the kind of business model of sports car racing is more or less built on a wealthy amateur driver who wants to pay for a seat. Apparently, to race at Le Mans in the LMP2 prototype class, if you want a seat in there, apparently for Le Mans you're over £1 million for that, reportedly, which is an extraordinary amount of money. But if I had £1 million to spare, that's exactly what I would be spending on. So GTD, what did we see? Well, we saw a bit of history being made, actually, because the number one, the winning car, the number 96 BMW M6, the Turner Motorsport car in the wonderful Liqui Moly livery, Bill Oberlin, Robbie Foley, and Mark Verne. They won the race, and Bill Oberlin equalled the record set by Scott Pruitt of 60 wins in the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship. Absolutely incredible. And he was asked by pit lane reporter Shea Adam after the race, saying, you're going to come back next year and try and get the record all for yourself. He says, yeah, I'm coming back next year and the year after that and the year after that. And so that is so cool to see that kind of that optimism and that from a professional driver who's been at the front of the sport for so much. I mean, in endurance racing, to win 60 times is absolutely amazing, because there's so much that can go wrong over the course of an endurance race in a championship like IMSA. So to win on 60 occasions is just quite extraordinary. They were followed home by the number 29 Audi R8 of Feller, Morad and Mies, who have not been a regular entrant in the championship, mainly focusing on the endurance races. So it was good to see them back, and good to see an Audi R8 running back at the front of the GTD class. It's been a very, very difficult year for those Audi R8s so far this year. And then closing out the podium was the number 9 Pfaff Porsche, the plaid pattern Porsche of Hargrove, Robichon and Kern. Unfortunately, the number 33 Felipe Fraga, Ben Keating and Jeroen Blekemolen, they were leading right up until the very end of the race, with Felipe Fraga right up into the last lap, holding off charging Bill Oberlin in the BMW M6 behind and making his little Mercedes AMG 2 or 3 cars wide, trying to keep him behind. And it looked like he was really, really struggling for pace. The reason for that was he actually ran out of fuel halfway through the last lap. And after a 10-hour race, that must be absolutely gut-wrenching. After winning Le Mans on the road and losing out over a small technicality, and then attempting to win a big race like Petit Le Mans, and running out of fuel in the last lap, you just can't imagine the agony for those guys. And reportedly Ben Keating and his co-drivers Felipe Fraga and Jeroen Blekemolen, they will be focusing only on the World Endurance Championship in the Project One Porsche for the next little while, and reportedly not coming back to IMSA next year. So that would have been so nice for them to sign off on on a win. So very, very sad indeed, and that is just very, very dramatic and very, very exciting for those of us sitting behind our TV screen or at the racetrack. But for the team involved and the drivers involved, it must be absolutely gut wrenching. So commiserations to those guys. The number 86 Acura did win the championship in the end. The Mike Shank racing car, but unfortunately, they won the championship by starting the race. That was enough to score the points they needed to put themselves out of the question, out of the running, for the title. But unfortunately, breaking down with early mechanical problems very early in the race, which took them out, and in the end lost Acura the manufacturer's title in GT Daytona, with Lamborghini pinching that title at the very last moment. It looked like Acura were going to hang on, but the number 57 car, the Caterpillar sponsored car driven by Catherine Legg, unfortunately was involved in contact with the number 63 Ferrari, Tony Vielander, coming up the inside and clipping Catherine Legg in the number 57 Acura, and the Ferrari spinning off. And after that point, Catherine's pace seemed to drop off from what she was running before that, and unfortunately dropped back a couple of positions, and in doing so lost the championship, the manufacturer's championship, to Lamborghini, which was such a shame. I want to make a special mention to that number 57 car, entered at the start of the year by Mike Shank Racing, sponsored by Caterpillar. And it was an all-female lineup. Catherine Legg, a very, very experienced driver, Formula IndyCar driver, IMSA race winner, very, very high-quality driver. Christina Nielsen, the Dane, who in qualifying this year has taken all, as the bronze driver, she's taken all the qualifying duties and has performed very, very well in qualifying. And Bia Figueiredo, the Brazilian touring car driver, she's been fantastic as well. They've just not had the luck this year. Been following their progress very closely, and it's just not quite come together. Their pace has been decent, but just been a little bit unlucky. But from what I understand, they will be back next year, and they'll be back for Daytona. And watch out for them, because they are quick, those girls, and what they've done is a wonderful achievement to get out there and fight at the front of a very, very competitive motor racing class. So that's IMSA. There you go. That's IMSA Petit Le Mans, one of the biggest races of the year for the championship. It's a championship which I thoroughly enjoy watching. I've really enjoyed watching it all year. It's brilliant because you can watch the race live for free on IMSA.tv or via Radio Le Mans, and the commentary from the IMSA TV crew, Jeremy Shaw and John Hydor, is fantastic, very well informed, very entertaining as well. And also, if you don't see the race live, a few days after the race, the whole race comes up on YouTube, where you can watch it at your leisure. Throughout the rest of the week or whatever. So that's something that I've found very useful, being able to keep up and watch all the races all the way through, and some great racing there has been indeed. Now, I've forgotten one thing. We need to mention one thing. Jan Magnussen. Jan Magnussen, unfortunately, will, now that the season has closed, has left the Corvette racing team. Now, Jan Magnussen's a former Formula One driver. His son, Kevin Magnussen, is a current Formula One driver, and he has had the most amazing career in American sports car racing and global sports car racing. He has been with the Corvette racing team for 16 years. He has had 35 victories with the team. He's won the Sebring 12 Hours 5 times with Corvette. He's had 5 IMSA championships, 156 races, a Daytona 24-hour win, 4 Petit Le Mans wins, and 4 Le Mans 24-hour wins. So one of a very, very small number of drivers who have won at Le Mans, Petit Le Mans, Daytona and Sebring all together. Absolutely extraordinary career. Finishing, even though they've had a tough year this year, him and his co-driver Antonio Garcia, but still coming home in third in the championship. Quite an extraordinary achievement, I must say. Really, really, really sad that he won't be continuing with Corvette Racing. It seems to me he's just part of the furniture there at Corvette Racing, and a big part of that successful racing team over the years. The official line in the press releases is that he's exploring other racing opportunities. So I tell you what, any sports car racing team in the world would be very well served by a guy of Jan Magnussen's quality. It may be that he goes into something like GT Daytona as the professional driver with an amateur. You never know. He would make a very, very good mentor for a young amateur as well. It really, really sad to see him finish his time with Corvette Racing, but some things don't last forever. So we wish you all the best, Jan. It's been brilliant watching you, and wish you all the best for whatever you decide to do next. So that's all for this episode. Thank you very much for listening. It's been a longer one than usual, but lots to talk about with IMSA in this episode. You can follow our show and subscribe via our platform Podbean, or whatever your podcast preferred podcast platform is. And if you follow the show or subscribe to the show, your device will give you a notification whenever a new episode is released. You can also follow the show on Facebook, which is just the Peter MacKay Motorsport Podcast. You can follow us on Instagram, which is at Peter MacKay Motorsport, or on Twitter, which is at Mackay Podcast. Or you can do it the old-fashioned way. You can get in touch with me via my website, which is www.petermackaymotorsport.com. So thanks very much for listening, and I look forward to speaking to you again very soon.